Welcome, everyone. Welcome back to another live stream. I'm your host, Danny Haifong, and we have a great show for you today. Donald Trump is now threatening Russia again. He's reduced his so-called 50-day deadline for Russia to make peace in Ukraine to just under 2 weeks. This comes as the EU just took a bludgeoning at the trade negotiations table, and Ukraine continues to lose ground on the battlefield amid unrest that threatens to oust Zelensky. In fact, US and UK counterparts are discussing this scenario right now. But what explains this chaotic yet seemingly frozen policy of the US under Trump vis-a-vis Ukraine? What has Russia's response been? Hint, hint, it's been quite devastating. To discuss all this and more, I have two very special guests with me today. Patrick Henningsen of 21st Century Wire and independent analyst, financial analyst, Alex Krainer. Gentlemen, thanks so much for joining me today.
Great to be with you, Danny.
Danny. Thank you for the invite.
Of course, yes. It's Alex's first time on this channel, won't be his last, so it's really good to be with both of you. And let's get going with this. I wanted to talk about the revised deadline, the revised ultimatum from Donald Trump first to Russia. Here's what he said with Keir Starmer during his meeting with him.
I'm going to make a new deadline of about 10 or 12 days from today. There's no reason in waiting. There's no reason in waiting. It's 50 days. I want to be generous, but we just don't see any progress being made.
So after this was said, gentlemen, Russia responded in a variety of ways, as it generally does. So first, we had a massive strike that was backed, of course, by Russian President Vladimir Putin. The New York Times highlights the prison which was attacked in Kiev that killed 16. But it's part of a wave, as the New York Times says, of strikes directed at 73 Ukrainian cities and villages over the course of the evening after this ultimatum was made. Now, there's also Dmitry Medvedev. He had this to say. He was sparring with Lindsey Graham. And first, I'll just show that's Lindsey Graham's response. But this is what he had to say. First, he said Trump is playing the ultimatum game with Russia, 50 days or 10. He should remember two things. Russia isn't Israel or even Iran. Each new ultimatum is a threat and a step towards war, not between Russia and Ukraine, but with his own country. Don't go down the Sleepy Joe road. And Lindsey Graham, you all can read this on your own, audience, but the main message was get to the peace table. And Medvedev said, you cannot dictate terms to Russia. Negotiations will end when all of our objectives of the military operation have been achieved. So, Patrick, your response to all of these developments, given what is not only happening in Ukraine, but overall with really the U.S.'s posture vis-a-vis Russia and the world situation?
That's the question, isn't it, Danny? The U.S.'s posture. What posture? That's the question. I don't see any posture to speak of. I see a lot of pivoting. I see a lot of flip-flopping. I see a lot of confusion. And I see a lot of, quite frankly, desperation by Ukraine itself, of course, but also by the Trump administration, taking these kind of ambiguous remarks about, deadlines and so forth. It's at some point it loses credibility, and I think this is the problem. I don't think. See, the problem is Donald Trump. There's no W. There's no political W for Trump, but there is a W. There is a W for certain people, like certain vested interests. The W is, and this, in my opinion, this is the fallback position of the United States. The W is to extend this conflict, to keep ramping up arms sales, to watch European defense stocks go through the roof as they have been for the last year, and U.S. defense stocks as well. That's a W. They don't. You can't say that from a political point of view. It's kind of an unsavory thing for any politician, even Trump, to say too loudly. But that's the W. And the W for Russia is to continue making the same type of steady progress that they're making on the battlefield. And so Medvedev's right. One way or another, Russia's going to secure its national security interests. It's going to defend its interests one way or another. And it doesn't look like the United States or Ukraine or NATO is going to stop them. So that's kind of where we're at. This is kind of an unofficial standoff, if you will. That's what it looks like, because Russia's not going to abide by any unconditional demands or, terms of surrender laid down by Donald Trump. It's not going to happen. So there's no serious talk from Washington about the political settlement. And from Russia's point of view, let's just be honest, it hasn't changed much in since February 2022. It's not much different than the original Istanbul Agreement. Yes, the territories and the borders have changed somewhat since then. Ukraine's lost more actual territory, and they'll probably lose more the longer it goes. For Ukraine, it's cut your losses. But that's politically untenable as long as Zelensky's in. So the big question, Danny, is what comes after 50 days or 10 or 12 days? Is it going to be another sneak attack? Because that's what happened before the last impasse, the last negotiations. We saw a gallant raid, the brave Ukrainians hitting the Russian nuclear deterrent. Or are we looking at regime change? Is Zelensky coming in to replace Zelensky, or are we just basically playing the same game we've been playing for the last how long of this facade of negotiations? Meanwhile, as I said initially, the vested interests already have their game in place, and so that's the real game behind the scenes. Russia has its game, the West has its financial game as well, and the rest is political theater for us. That's the question. What is going to happen after 10 or 12 days?
Alex, same question to you.
I agree generally with everything that Patrick just said. I think that what's really, really important to always keep in mind is that we are witnessing the clash of two systems generally. Which makes the conflict in Ukraine the same conflict that we're witnessing in the Middle East, the same conflict that might happen with China in the future. And the logic of this conflict is such that you can't be, you have to be on one side or the other. And the two sides, the two systems of governance is the Western oligarchic neo-colonialist imperialistic system of governance versus pretty much the rest of the world. And now it so happens that there are certain powers in the world that are willing and able to resist the diktat of the empire, these powers being primarily Russia and China, and also Iran. And so, the question is then, what side did the Trump administration take in this conflict? And my conclusion, based on the past 6 months of Trump administration's activities, has been that Trump has really taken the side against the empire. So very often Trump makes these statements, which are, I think, largely psyops. He makes these statements for certain audiences, and he's in the UK now. And the UK is the most desperately warmongering side in this conflict with Ukraine. The empire that we have in the West today is still headquartered in the city of London. That's still its strategic, spiritual, and it's still the main headquarters. The United States has been mainly the financial and military muscle for the empire. And I think that Trump has been consistently trying to extricate the United States from this imperial role. But this is a very complicated task, because the groups and interests that have benefited the most from the United States being the empire's enforcement arm are the most powerful groups in the United States, being the banking cartel, the military industrial complex, and certain other groups. And so, he's in London now. He's in the UK now. He's meeting with Starmer. I think that he has to give them the impression that he is still game for being the enforcement arm for the empire. But I think that in reality, he has no intention of doing this. If we go back to the beginning of the administration, even before he was inaugurated, we had Marco Rubio, who said that the United States, that his administration is regarding the post-World War II order as more than obsolete. He said that it has even been weaponized against the United States, and that the new reality are the multipolar integrations. Now, it seems fairly definite that Trump administration has chosen the path of multipolar integrations. Where I have my doubts is that Trump being Trump, he won't accept joining the group as one among the equals, to say, okay, now we're going to make nice with Russia, with China, with India, with Iran, and so forth. He's going to try to, it seems to me that he's going to try to hijack the project and make it his own. So derail the BRICS movement and try to finagle his own multipolar way. So I wouldn't take his statements about giving Vladimir Putin so many days or however many days. I wouldn't take that seriously at this point. Let's remember the only way that he could change course in the war in Ukraine, and even that wouldn't be enough, if the United States actually stepped in and said, right, we're going to provide a real ironclad security guarantee for the government in Kiev. Trump's not going to do that. And so everything else is just marginal posturing, positioning, psyops, deception. I think it'll take time for us to know what his true intentions are.
Patrick, how do you see this then? Because on the one hand, Alex says that there is reason to believe Trump eventually and is finagling a kind of different posture for the United States. And at the same time, the results, it seems like, of this conflict appear to be going in the same direction that they've been going under the Biden administration. So what is your assessment of this and your response to Alex?
Yeah, I mean, I reported on, Marco Rubio at the time. I think it was an interview he did with Megyn Kelly, actually, where he mentioned the multipolar world. And, I think he's just been, or the beginning of the administration, first couple of days. And that was the last I heard of anybody in the administration saying such a thing. So while it's on record, and many of us did report at the time, and I was obviously very happy to hear that, but everything that has transpired since has been unipolar rhetoric coming from the administration. And, I'm not privy to any plans they have behind the scenes, but how the optics globally are that the United States is acting more like a unipolar actor than ever before, because previous administrations, even the neocons, to a degree, still acting within the international system, and the international system is comprised of rule sets. Okay, obviously the United States has set many of the rule sets, but their allies as well have adopted those through the G7 and these other consensus building institutions over the years, and trade, commerce, international relations, treaties, agreements, or accords all take place within that rule set. The problem with Trump is it's hard to identify any discernible adherence to any rule set. It's almost like it's diplomacy on the fly, it's intimidation. It's almost like international racketeering. Even if, Trump was building a golf course in Miami and, having to deal with the Teamsters and the local planning permission, the governor and whatnot, You can't get everybody in to sort of do the project and halfway in pull out and then shoot the governor or threaten to bomb the state legislature, which is kind of what the United States is doing internationally. So at that point, the whole system breaks down. So there's no deal to be had. If you can't attach yourself or follow or any agreed upon rules or terms of engagement, like you have in the business world, like we have in our countries in terms of laws, of course, the United States flouts, to a large degree, international law is a facade and international norms are a facade, but you still need them in order to pretend or at least give the impression that there is some order. And then people can work together to either, make things happen, to stop bad situations, to pause, to rebuild. The United States is basically, I think, taking a wrecking ball to all of that in a very short space of time, starting with the Biden administration, mind you. But the last 6 months of the Trump administration haven't been very good. If you look at all the three major flashpoints, you have Ukraine, you have Iran, and then you have Gaza in the Middle East. And in terms of the U.S. deals or diplomacy, they fumbled all three of those. And then let's add global tariffs to that as well. There are four major geopolitical, global, major flashpoints and areas of concern. The U.S., I think, in my opinion, have fumbled on all four of those. And to the detriment of the United States, I think economically, on the tariff wars, but now he's using tariffs in a way that tariffs were never supposed to be used, which is he's using them as sanctions, as another form of sanctioning. And the ultimate here is this, after 10 or 12 days, I guess he's threatening 100% tariffs against anybody as a form of secondary sanctions that dares to trade with Russia. That's not going to happen. That's not going to happen for the mere fact that this is the president that got elected, okay? Many of us voted for that man because he said he'd end the Ukraine war in 24 hours. So that's a big jump from ending the Ukraine war, then declaring war on economic war, okay? Because that's what sanctions or weaponized tariffs are, as tools of coercion against your allies. So they're not going to be able to do that to China, India, or Europe. Europe trades with Russia. Europe buys energy from Russia still, billions worth, uranium and so forth. It's just not going to happen. So where are we going with this? That's the thing. And at some point, is everything that the U.S. or this administration says publicly, is it just going to be disregarded as, oh, well, it's what Trump said this week, could change next week. And I think everyone's just going to kind of go along and do their business and basically tell him what he needs to hear, nod, okay, and then, cross your fingers and hope for the best. But, I don't think any of this stuff is going to stick. That includes the trade deals. That includes the economic deals. Look at that trip to the Middle East with Saudi Arabia and Qatar. Trillions of dollars of direct investment into the United States. That's not going to happen. But he got a huge win. Public relations wise, Fox was just over the moon over that. And the same with von der Leyen this week. Similar sort of pronouncements afterwards about DFI into the U.S. from Europe. Europe doesn't have any money they can't throw $700 billion into the U.S. and invest. I mean, Europe's having trouble holding its seams together at the moment. So to pay for the rearming of Europe, they have to go into deficit spending and austerity measures to prepare for World War III. They can't prop up the U.S. economy. What's Trump talking about? So that's the thing. How much of this is just, just throwaway public relations fodder to get from one situation to the next, and how much of it is actually based on anything real? What are the policy changes? What's actually going to change beyond the rhetoric? That's the big question.
Yeah, and Alex, so Russia has been very clear-headed throughout this whole process. Here's Sergei Lavrov, foreign minister of Russia. He had these words to say at a recent forum he presented at. I'll just read it since it's all in Russian, but it is subtitled. We have a lot of things to do. The main of these things is, of course, to defeat the enemy. first time in all of Russia history, is fighting alone against the whole West. So these were quite striking words. And, Alex, also Russia is continuing to make huge gains on the battlefield. This is from Ukrainska Pravda, Ukrainian source, that Russia is edging toward Pokrovsk in a semi-encirclement in the Donetsk Oblast, and that this is about weeks away or so from falling. And that's that would be a huge defeat for Ukraine. So, Alex, your assessment of this, the Russian response to all of this, because I think we have our perceptions and our understanding of how Trump is in the United States, and of course the entire collective West is behaving here, but also there's the Russian response to this. So your take.
Well, Russia is doing what it's doing because it is existential for them. The Western powers, and when I say Western powers, it's been France, it's been Poland, it's been Lithuania, it's been Sweden, Germany, it's Ukraine. The actual power is the banking establishments that end up financing all these wars. But they've been going at Russia for more than 300 years now, and it is very clear that they will never stop. And so for the Russians, it's very clear that they have to simply remove the source of threats, that they have to remove their security threats and sources of their vulnerability. So what the Russians are doing makes perfect sense. And the way they're doing it has been extremely cautious and responsible. They have, at every step of the way, they gave peace a chance. They, 4 days after they started the special military operations, they already started the negotiations. So I think that history will judge Russia kindly, in the sense that Russia's actions can be explained and they make sense. The Western actions, it's very different. It's been some kind of a fanatical obsession with destroying Russia, partitioning Russia, regime changing it, and turning the Russian population into basically slave labor force to help Western financial interests extract Russian resources for the benefit of Western corporations and banks. I don't know whether we can arrive at sensible judgment about what is going on the basis of public statements by either Russian side or the American side. I think that they are all concealing their hand. Trump Trump, not just during this 6 months of his term in office now, but practically since he started into politics, he has been consistent in the sense of wanting to extricate the United States from its imperial role and returning it to its Republican traditions. We saw that in his first administration, it didn't go so well. He got practically immediately sabotaged, and he got run over by the big Russiagate scandal. So it's very difficult for me to imagine that he just made that pivot from January on of this year, and that he put the United States back in the driver's seats of the unipolar global order. It's very hard for me to accept that. It just doesn't really make sense. And if that were his intention, then why the whole huge, massive, elaborate deception to begin with? Because he was facing very powerful headwinds to even get into the White House. He could have just as easily said, hey, business as usual. We're going to continue exactly the way the Bush 43, Obama, Biden, Clinton, everybody else did. And he would have faced no opposition, no impeachment, none of this. And then, this new camaraderie with Keir Starmer, I don't buy that for a second either, because, let's go back to the Russiagate scandal. That whole thing was cooked up by the British intelligence services. And I know as a fact that Trump very perfectly understands this. and he understands that the British have done everything to prevent Trump from becoming president. Keir Starmer himself sent 100 labor operatives in the last stages of the election to try to turn the swing states to Kamala Harris. Keir Starmer's political patron, Tony Blair, was the political patron of Barack Obama. And not only that, but remember who cooked up the dossier, the Russiagate dossier. It was Christopher Steele, the MI6 guy. The Christopher Steele took Donald Trump to court in London, and in April of this year obtained a £685,000 judgment against Trump. So this is not being talked about, but the idea that Trump is somehow oblivious to all this and that he's suddenly treating Keir Starmer's cabinet as friends, partners, and allies, I can't quite square this with what I know about Trump. I think that there's a great deal of deception and psyops going on, and that it'll take time for us to understand. But he's also said many times, in many statements, he said that he trusts Vladimir Putin. So it makes me wonder if there aren't continued communications and cooperation between Russia and the United States that are ongoing, and that all of these public statements are for public consumption to their own domestic audiences. And I'm not necessarily talking about the average voter. I'm talking about perhaps the military-industrial complex, the intelligence apparatus, the deep state, and all of these people who, are still hoping somehow to, as the Brits say, flood the zone around Trump and turn him around to their camp. So I'm generally very suspicious of all these public statements, because I can't see Trump pivoting from his long-held position, 1776, and turning the United States into a global manufacturing powerhouse, which is probably his main reason for going all with these tariffs like a loose cannon. And so I tend to try to find enough dots to connect below the surface appearances of things to try to understand what's going on. And now, if it is true that they are preparing to replace Zelensky with Zaluzhny, I'm going to say this, and I'm totally going on the limb because I've been paying attention to this story since the time Zaluzhny vanished for 2 weeks in Ukraine. Remember, he just vanished. I think that the Brits are walking into a trap. And I think that if Zaluzhny takes over in Ukraine, the West is going to lose Ukraine, and Ukraine is going to pivot back into the Russian orbit.
Patrick, Alex asked a question earlier, like why all the deception on the Trump side if his overall goal was just to remain in the unipolar camp. So I definitely want your reaction. And these public statements, well, on the one hand, they are getting quite how should I say, bombastic and threatening, to the point where you have a U.S. General, Chris Donahue, literally saying that NATO is going to take Kaliningrad if this war escalates in the direction that they see it, which is Vladimir Putin and Russia is going to, take Ukraine and beyond. So, but your answer to this question, given that there is a lot of talk being had, but then there's also a lot of things happening too. For example, this latest trade deal with the EU, which has not only this horrific imbalance in the tariff situation, but also promises that the EU will buy U.S. weapons to do what's been happening, continue the conflict. Your thoughts?
Well, I mean, look, I don't look at it as deception as much as just political theater, which is nothing new. All politicians throughout history and administrations engage in political theater. I just think with the Trump administration, there's more of it. And also, he is running foreign policy from a social media account, effectively Truth Social and X, and that's completely unconventional, and it probably isn't going to work. So there's nothing anchoring any of these statements. There's nothing that's coherent or that abides by any kind of due process or anything like that. So it's all just kind of disposable comments and stuff like that. So I don't really take it that seriously. But other countries might be taking it seriously. I mean, us in the punditry class, of course, we're very cynical and skeptical no matter who we're talking about. But other countries are like, well, can I do business with the U.S.? Can I engage with them on any meaningful level? Are they agreement capable? And as Sergei Lavrov said it years ago, the United States is no longer agreement capable. That's including Joe Biden. So I think this is a systemic problem with the United States. It's kind of lost its place in the world. It's also losing respect from a lot of its allies. So from that point of view, I mean, anything that Trump said on the campaign trail, no matter how good it sounds, it's rhetoric. It's because to make these things happen, and every president does it. Every single U.S. president that I've seen since George W. Bush has campaigned on an anti-war, no nation building platform, and they've won. The ones who've done that have won. George W. Bush defeated Al Gore on that basis. Okay, no new nation building, etc. And look what happened with George W. Bush. Barack Obama came in, peace president, day one, I'm going to end the war in Iraq, of course, and he won. He got the anti-war vote. He got the, Wisconsin, northern Wisconsin, Michigan. He got the Puritans. He got the Norwegian Americans. All those keys, bellwether counties and so forth. He won those and became president in 2008. But what happened during 2 terms of Obama? Well, something quite different. Donald Trump ran on a peace platform in 2016, and he did start new wars in his first term, and he engaged in existing wars as well. So he put boots on the ground in Syria, and he basically pushed the Abraham Accords forward, which led to October 7th, and he continued the absolute debacle in Yemen, just for starters, and he gave offensive weapons to Ukraine and really ramped up the conditions for what eventually would take place in February of 2022. Joe Biden ran sort of as a stable alternative to an unstable Trump, and that wasn't what happened. Joe Biden was a disaster, one of the worst presidents in U.S. history. But the problem is Donald Trump is matching him on policy. And it's like Donald Trump has inherited a portfolio from Joe Biden that is almost unfixable. Okay, the only way to get out of some of these situations or to ameliorate them would be to take a drastic 180-degree turn and then take all the political flack that comes with that. And this is a president that's just not willing to do that. He's not willing to go against the Israeli lobby in any serious way. He allowed the lobby to appoint every single member of his cabinet that has anything to do with national security or foreign policy. Okay, Howard Lutnick and Jared Kushner presided over that process of shortlisting cabinet members, and everybody's pro-Israel to the hilt. And that means they really don't care. I mean, they don't have the skill set to help alleviate the situation in Ukraine. And Donald Trump's pyramid decision-making structure that he likes to do to micromanage everything as a chief executive means that you can't have anybody in there that could potentially intellectually outrank him in any serious way. So you have a bunch of social media posers, and Pete Hegseth is a weekend host from Fox News, whose highest rank is a major in the U.S. military, and he was a reservist from Minnesota or something like that. And his biggest claim to fame was he was a Gitmo, looking after goat herders and taxi drivers. So, I mean, I guess he did a tour in Afghanistan and Iraq, but that is nobody to run a $1 trillion global defense leviathan. I'm sorry. There is 100 generals that are more qualified than Pete Hegseth. Why was he selected? He was selected because the Israeli lobby said, we want him. And Trump saw him on Fox, so everything kind of came together serendipitously. So, I mean, but the reality is the deep state in Britain and the United States deep state and the Five Eyes complex are so intermingled, okay? You can't pull them apart. Trump could sort of say things that are uncomfortable politically against the British, but at the end of the day, you can't pull these two countries and their establishments and institutions apart. You can't pull Wall Street from the City of London. You can't pull MI6 and GCHQ from the NSA and the CIA. It's just not going to happen. And not only that, they share a nuclear deterrent, okay? And so it's just the same thing with Israel. There's no way the U.S. can't discipline Israel. France can't discipline Israel because Israel has a nuclear arsenal, which they obtained from France and the United States. And they're both running political cover, allowing this entity to basically run roughshod over the region for so long, on behalf of them, by the way, because Israel does their bidding geopolitically in the great game 2.0. But the other thing is the U.S. is so heavily invested in arming the Arctic and building 47 new military bases in Norway, Sweden, Finland, and Denmark. Scandinavia has the biggest military expansion U.S. footprint in the world. But when it's done, it will be as big or bigger than what's in the Middle East in terms of military footprint by the United States. So all this talk of NATO being this and NATO being irrelevant, that's not where the money is being put into. The money is saying, no, it's not irrelevant, it's expanding. And no matter what any U.S. president says, to turn that Titanic around, I honestly don't think, it's almost like it's impossible to do. They are arming the Arctic. They're committed to it. So is Britain and the rest of the leading NATO countries. And so is, as Alex said, the global capital is behind that. So, I mean, this is a difficult thing to change course with. It would take some kind of an unpopular politician to make a dent in it, or they'd have to be very, very strategic in doing that. And what can Donald Trump do in 3 years? The one thing that could possibly potentially be positive is that if Trump makes such a mess of things in 3 years, he's setting the table for the next president who comes in to make it look like they're reasonable and maybe pull back on some of the crazy stuff. So in that case, Trump could be, positive in the long run, just from a relatively positive, from a relative point of view. But right now, it's, I don't know. I see what's happening on the ground is happening, and it doesn't look like anything significantly changing on the ground. In fact, it's kind of getting worse in some areas. So I agree with Alex in that sense, that you can't really trust or believe anything that is being said publicly.
Yeah, and definitely want to get to the situation in West Asia, Gaza, etc. Later on in the program. But first, Alex, I wanted to, earlier you said, and I've heard you say this many times, that the world is becoming multipolar, and there is no questioning this. And I think one of the interesting things about what's happening with the United States and the West and how they are addressing the Ukraine conflict is it almost feels like an admission that things are falling apart. And we see this in so many ways. I mean, we saw this. I'm sure you followed the horrific trade deal that the EU just signed with Donald Trump. And here's how Ursula von der Leyen described the experience, which kind of highlights the real descent that Europe has taken.
No, it was very difficult because we started far apart from each other. It was tough, fair, but it was tough. And therefore, rightly so, you saw the tension at the beginning. So we had to work hard to come to a common position. And till the very end, as always in negotiations, you don't know whether you'll find the landing point, the landing zone at the very end, or whether it crashes. So Alex and Patrick, fair here is the EU gets nothing and the US gets everything. And even the things that the EU did promise, they're admitting they can't even guarantee. They are promising upwards of $1 trillion of investment in the United States.
including 600 billion in investment that will largely be private sector and cannot necessarily be controlled by the state. And then you also have the situation with Zelensky, Alex, that you've also highlighted here, where Zelensky has been subject to massive protests from his own base, mind you, after he attempted to get rid of NABU or put it under his dominion, the executive's dominion, the so-called police agency in Ukraine. He tried to pass a bill. That bill was scrapped right away after massive protests occurred. But now there are discussions of Zaluzhny and maybe Budanov and all kinds of figures potentially replacing Zelensky. So things seem to be falling apart, Alex. And I'm curious on how you see this shaping and forming the policy trajectory that we've been discussing. Oh, you're muted.
Very hard to.
You're good.
It's very hard to imagine that Russia isn't going to win their war in Ukraine. I mean, that's pretty much over. Now, for the Western powers, what is critical now is to try to preserve Ukraine's access to the Black Sea, so to prevent Russia from taking Odessa and the rest of the Black Sea coast, and to make sure that the government in Kiev, whatever it is, Zelensky, Zaluzhny, Poroshenko, whoever, that they remain aligned with the West. And then, the Western powers will regroup and try to stage further attacks on Russia, and by whatever means they can. It could be terror, it could be some form of opium wars, sabotage operations, whatever way of trying to destabilize Russia and bring about a regime change, and replace Putin with some new, Boris Yeltsin. That's the objective. And so, in order to ensure the access to Russia into the Russian soft belly through a friendly with a friendly government cooperating with this, they need the Kiev government to remain aligned with the West, and they need to keep access to the port of Odessa. For the Russians, the objective is exactly the opposite, except that they don't need to take Odessa by force. They don't need to conquer the rest of Ukraine by force. They need to make sure that the government in Kiev realigns back with Moscow, and then they can take over the remainder of Ukraine administratively, so to say. They can demand new elections. They can support their own candidates, people who are friendly to Russia. They can demand war crimes tribunals for all the neo-Nazi thugs, people who are responsible for the May 2014 massacre in Odessa, and on and on and on. And that way, with time, they can purge Ukraine from this neo-Nazi, far-right, extreme pro-Western element. And then, Ukraine becomes something like a Belarus, a country that's aligned with Russia, that's an ally and a buffer between Russia and the West. And this is exactly what the Western powers are trying to prevent. Now, where does Trump stand in this? I agree with Patrick that the appearance of things is not positive. It looks absolutely awful. But among other things, I'm trying. I'm trying to pick up the cues also from Trump's allies and his supposed enemies, and I see that the Russians are still kind of relaxed and cooperative, whereas the West is flat out hysterical about Trump. The Brits and the Western Europeans, they absolutely detest Trump. They hate him. Very different to the way they looked at Obama, at Biden, and so forth. So something is different, and whatever is percolating below the surface is a different current than what we had before. I could be wrong, because some people say, well, the simplest explanation tends to be the right one. But, I would remind everybody that when Putin came to power in 1999, that his greatest supporter was Tony Blair. And he was the first statesman who came to visit Putin when he became president. He was overtly supportive of Vladimir Putin. In fact, Sir Richard Dearlove from the MI6, who was the head of MI6 at the time, actually conceded that the MI6 had a hand in bringing Vladimir Putin to power. And then over the next 2 to 3 years, the appearance of things was that Vladimir Putin was absolutely their errand boy. During the first 2 years of his presidency, he had 9 meetings with Tony Blair. He got a state visit in the United Kingdom. First Russian statesman since, I think, the 1800s at some point, who got a state visit in Britain, and he rode, with the Queen in an open top car. And I think that this too was a deception, but it was necessary because Vladimir Putin had to, and whoever was backing him, whoever was supporting him, they needed to secure his political base, to remove the risk of him being overthrown if he showed his hand too soon. And it was only in 2003 when he lined up, Russia's oligarchs, the gang of 7 bankers and others, and set the rules, that the West realized, crap, we got played. And so I can't discount that in this case as well, we have a lot of deception on the part of the Trump administration, and that it'll take time for us to understand, did he really pivot back to the unipolar global order? Or is he committed to returning the United States to its Republican tradition and embracing the multipolar integrations process?
Yeah, Patrick, your reaction to this?
I'll just comment on, because I think the British factor is important. That you have to understand something about the mindset. I think a present company understands this. The belief in Westminster is there's a fanatical, I would even say evangelical belief that the British will defeat Russia, that they defeat Russia. It's always been Britain's the brains, America's the muscle. That hasn't changed so much. And so they threw a solid and kind of made Trump look good with Operation Spider's Web. My personal belief that was a British directed operation, probably with the help of Israelis as well, because similar tactics were used against Iran in the opening gambit of Israel's attack on Iran. But so you have to understand that they believe that it's all that's needed is to find the right technical solution, and that they will adapt and overcome. The British mantra: adapt and overcome. And they have the SBU, they have the SBS, British, and the SAS, and so forth, and that they can win by disrupting, sabotaging, and derailing, and ultimately maybe decapitation of the Russian state. And no matter how long that takes, they're not, as Alex said correctly, they're not going to give up. This is a primordial, fanatical belief that is for some reason still there and manifest. So if you look at the British Strategic Defense Review, which was released a few months ago, they had Operation Killweb. That's the name of their full spectrum drone attack doctrine, okay? And just a week after that was released in Britain, you saw Operation Spider's Web launched. And that was good for NATO. It was good for Trump. Trump believed it gave leverage. It made Ukraine look strong. It put Russia on its back heels. In reality, all it did was, piss off the bear, basically. If you look at the Russia really stepped up its its progress and its responses from the air and so forth, which you've shown earlier, Danny, since that time. But they believe, the British believe, that they have the technology, that they will deploy that technology, and they will overwhelm Russia with these various tactics and technologies and their sort of deep cover and subterfuge operations over time, that they'll do it. I personally disagree. I think the Russian state, its institutions, are very resilient, probably the most resilient, some of the most resilient on the planet, second to maybe the United States, and some European countries, of course, but very strong, very resilient, as is their economy, as is their balance of resolve. So in the balance of resolve category, historically, Russia has proven that it's committed to go the distance and do what it takes to secure its interests and to protect Mother Russia. And I think they're demonstrating that in Ukraine, but that doesn't mean the British are going to give up given the chance. So right now the British are running, have been handling Zelensky from a soft power PR point of view, also with close protection, with British personnel protecting Zelensky. He basically is handled by, for all intents and purposes, close range by British intelligence. And of course, it was no surprise that they brought Zelensky to London to act as the Ukrainian ambassador, give him elocution lessons, English lessons, put him in a Savile Row suit. He publishes his memoirs a couple months ago, and now he's a sort of politician. They're grooming him for the possibility of being installed to replace an unpopular and a failing, ultimately an expired Zelensky, in order to create some kind of a change, or at least the facade of a change of the situation. So again, the British are in the sort of catbird seat in terms of controlling the political machinery, more with the United States is doing other things. So think of this like division of labor. I don't see the U.S. at odds at all with Britain. And I think that's the advantage. Of course, this has always been the advantage of the Anglo-American empire, is this idea that somehow they're separate when in fact they're not. They might have political differences with, as Alex pointed out, with Russiagate and driving, Dearlove and Steele and all these people driving Russiagate and undermining the Trump administration. But it also disciplined the Trump administration. It disciplined them in a certain way. It forced them into line in a certain way. And it forced them to kind of, engage with, other entities of the deep state in a certain way. But I'm sure they would have preferred Hillary Clinton. I mean, obviously, but second term, maybe they didn't feel confident Kamala Harris could, credibly pull anything off. And they believed that maybe that Trump could, and he kind of won by a landslide as well, which was difficult to derail. So from that point of view, but that's my feeling. I think if it's left to the British deep state, they'll play the long game. So keep this, do it. But see what they're going to do. Drone technology is a game changer, because if you're talking about decapitating regimes through terrorism, let's just call it what it is, full spectrum terrorism, this is going to provoke a preemptive nuclear action by a country like Russia at some point. You can't keep doing this. There's going to be a visceral reaction at some point down the line if it's an existential threat to Russia. They can take out regimes. Any regime, probably, given time, with the technology that's being developed, autonomous AI drones. I mean, this is another game. So they're depending on Russia's patience. They're depending on Russia keeping the door open for negotiations, and this expectation of goodwill. But that's kind of being whittled away gradually. Russia's no longer leaving that door open. The Iranians are no longer leaving that door open. They no longer trust the U.S. So these are the conditions for war, actually. And that, to me, is the biggest concern.
And, I definitely want both of your reactions to this before we move on. So, Alex, first to you. I definitely don't want to underestimate the influence of if we want to call them junior partners of the United States. If the American empire is the, big enchilada, then the junior partners cannot be underestimated in their influence. But at the same time, whether it's the UK, the EU, But at the same time, in the beginning, I went over all the ways that the Ukraine situation, the Ukraine project is falling apart, from the EU's inability to even keep promises that it subserviently agrees to with the United States, to, of course, the instability of Ukraine itself. So, you mentioned the U.S. returning to its Republican roots. And what's so interesting about the U.S. is that it's been at war for over 90% of its history. And immediately, as it became powerful enough to expand beyond its colonized borders, it began to usurp the former colonies, for example, the Philippines. But when we look at this history, then I guess what is different about, or what could be different about the Trump administration, given that we have on the one side all of this pressure to keep the Ukraine conflict going as it falls apart, and on the other, an empire that has existed for many, 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 many decades, centuries now, that operates in a particular kind of way. So your response to this, and then Patrick can conclude before we move on. Sorry, you're muted. There you go.
Please forgive me. Can you clarify what the question is?
Yeah, just your response to the fact that you have kind of this double-edged sword here. You have the U.S. as an empire for so many decades now, centuries, that operates in a particular kind of way with an objective expansionism, dominance, unipolar dominance, and then on the other, the Ukraine project itself falling apart from the EU to Ukraine, which in and of itself creates big pressures to continue the conflict, let alone rather than end it.
Yeah, how the United States fell into being an empire practically from the start is a deep mystery, and part of that mystery is that the history that they taught us in school is complete nonsense. And I think it always goes back to the financial interests that are rooted in the city of London, and the United States has actually been on the hook to those financial interests practically throughout their history. And as Patrick rightly said, that those two systems are so profoundly intertwined that it's difficult to imagine even being able to unravel that Gordian knot. But I think that in this sense, the Russiagate scandal might actually be the sword that's going to cut that knot open, because inevitably the investigations are going to be leading to London. And I think that just yesterday we had a new revelation by Frank Schweitzer. I think his name is Frank. That where he said explicitly that the whole thing was cooked up in London between the British intelligence and the CIA station chief in London, who was Gina Haspel at the time. She was sent there by John Brennan, who was also a close collaborator with Robert Hannigan, who at the time of the Russiagate was the head of the GCHQ, the British equivalent of the National Security Agency. I understand that it's very hard to imagine any of this unraveling, falling apart, and Great Britain becoming a neutral island nation minding its own business. But every empire throughout history has collapsed and fallen apart, and so will the British Empire. Britain may have been able to pull off this and that throughout its history because it's always been in a very strong position. And even when its military was weak, it still dominated the global financial system. And it still does too. But, that is not the case today in the same way that it has been, let's say, in the 90s, in the 80s, in the 70s, and farther in the past. The United States, since the first Trump administration, has been able to wrestle the control over the dollar, of the price of the US dollar and the treasury debt from London by creating SOFR, because the price of money was defined in London up until that point through LIBOR, London Interbank Offer Rate. Today we have in the United States we have SOFR, secured overnight lending lending rate. That's not exactly, but the price of debt is being set in the United States. So that extremely important part of the U.S. sovereignty has been wrestled away from London. Britain is today in an extremely dire straits economically, and a lot of what we see the British do today is actually born out of panic. Their military is next to non-existent. Their navy is extremely weak, and they are losing their industrial base as we speak. And then they have this government which seems to be doing everything to accelerate the decay, the decline of Great Britain. At the same time, throughout history, the British playbook was a mystery to its target powers, its rivals in the world, Russia and China and India and so forth. And so the British found it relatively easy to subdue them, to colonize them, to penetrate and co-opt their, institutions of governance and gain control of the levers of power in all these nations. But I think that today that has changed because the Russians, the Chinese, the Iranians, and certain other regional powers in the world understand how the system works and how they're vulnerable to the British secret diplomacy, to their intelligence apparatus, to British NGOs and private government contractors who come in and they start to penetrate the whole system. And I think that there's a very powerful and robust pushback against that. And I still, if you ask me to make a bet, I would still bet that the Trump administration has actually correctly identified who the enemy is, and that they have set their crosshairs on the City of London. Of course, you cannot go up against that overtly and to say like London is the enemy, because that would be the equivalent of rearranging the furniture in the house of blind. You don't do that. So, you have to kind of fight that fight by deception and covertly.
Yeah, Patrick, we can close on this, and if you all have time, we can do one more segment. But Patrick,
yeah, I think you guys are all overlooking the real source of British imperial power over history, and that is that the weather is so horrible here that it's allowed perfidious Albion to spend lots of time indoors plotting and scheming how to pillage their adversaries. That's the secret to British power, just so you guys know. No, in all seriousness, yeah, I mean, I kind of agree with Alex on that kind of long arc of history, and this isn't 1900, this isn't 1800, this isn't even 1945. China is the emergent global superpower. Economically, politically, I of course, maybe all their eggs in one basket with the Chinese Communist Party as the preeminent institution, but we can't argue with what they have done technologically, educational-wise, culturally. It's phenomenal. So this is a very different world we're living in now in 2025. And I'm not even talking about India or talking about a number of other Southeast Asian countries that will ultimately emerge as well as powerhouses, as well as even in Central Asia, in the Middle East, in fact, and Africa as well. So the world's very different. And but the problem, it's not so much about who has the economic power. The obsession is who is going to lead the civilizational arc. And that will be, linguistically, intellectual property wise, and a lot of these different areas, the rule of law, maritime law, democratic forms of government and so forth, consensus building institutions. Who's going to draw these up? Who's going to control them? We've got a potential split happening between East and West, between the, quote, global South and the Old North. Okay, so this is a very real point in history that we're looking at right now. So this is a very different world. So that the British and the Americans and the European countries are going to kick and scream all the way till the last possible minute. And I think this is part of what's driving the Europe's hawkish, strident, I mean, kind of insane, delusional, war talk over Ukraine. Because European politicians have not been able to have a strident position since the Second World War. And they have it now. It's, I can't pretend what it's like to be in power and have that type of power where when you're a wartime leader, even if you're from a small European country, that's additional power that is conferred and accrued to your position. And that's significant. We can't underestimate that. Look at Frederick Merz, and it's almost insane watching him in his early days coming to office. I'm like, something's wrong there. But that's what it is. They haven't had the ability to do that. And that urge is there. That primordial urge is there. And this is what we're seeing in Scandinavia. I mean, the Swedes have lost their mind. The Finns have lost their mind. I think with the overall collective defense, collective deterrent power of NATO, but with the United States standing in the background. And so that's the difference. And so these are really difficult, choppy political waters to navigate here because the orders are in flux, and it's going to be very, very messy and confusing as well. And I see an increased detachment from the political consensus and what people actually think and believe on the ground as well. That's becoming more and more prevalent, as is the wealth gap as well. So we have potentially some serious things emerging in the next few years.
Yeah, no, it's an explosive situation. Gentlemen, do you have time? I generally try to cover West Asia. There's a lot to cover there. Do you have another 20 minutes or so? Is that all right?
I can do about 10 minutes, I think.
Okay. Well, let's
good.
try it. Okay, if you're good, and Patrick, if you have to head out after, and Alex, you're able to finish up, that's great. All right, because I definitely wanted to talk about this. I have not been able to cover it yet. So Yemen has announced a huge escalation in its Red Sea operation. And what it is saying is that they will, Ansarallah, will go into phase 4 of the maritime blockade, essentially targeting any ship of any company from any nationality or destination that is using Israeli ports. So anything that they can reach, they will hit it. Now, why is Yemen doing this? Why is Ansarallah doing this? We know that they have almost every other day been firing at Israel, including, as we speak, firing ballistic missiles and hypersonic missiles toward Tel Aviv and surrounding areas. Now, the why here is really important, and maybe we can begin with you, Alex, because we have a situation that is absolutely devastating in Gaza right now that Israel and, of course, the U.S. right at its side is facilitating. The UN is reporting, and this is getting coverage all over Western mainstream media now, that there is widespread famine and starvation spreading across Gaza, meeting many of the indicators of this. And many people are dying just of this, let alone the horrific numbers of people that are being killed, children included, by Israeli and U.S.-backed fire. Now, the New York Times seems to now just realize that this war became unjust, even though this has been going on since October 2023. And Yemen itself declared its blockade back in November of 2023. So, Alex, I definitely want your reaction to this, because there's a contrast here. There's the almost Johnny-come-lately response of the United States, the Western mainstream media, to the plight of Gaza, and Yemen's continued and ongoing operation, which Israel has said they now have to put as a consistent and open front in opposition to what many are calling a genocide in Gaza. So your take, your thoughts.
Yeah, even Keir Starmer has now come around to feeling concerned for the plight of the Palestinians in Gaza. The Yemenis have been explicit about what they want. They want Israel to stop bombing Gaza, and they want to reopen the flow of humanitarian relief goods for the people of Gaza: water, food, medicine, energy. And so they said, we'll stop lobbing rockets into Israel when Israel stops bombing the people of Gaza, and when they allow humanitarian relief to reach the people. So it seems to me that the Yemenis, Ansar Allah, are the only group in the world, in fact, that is taking action in this conflict on the right side of history for the right reason, which would make them actually the Jedis in this conflict between the empire and the rest of humanity.
Yeah, Patrick, I know you've been covering this particular situation, both not only on the Yemeni side, but especially the Gaza side. So your reaction?
Well, just start with Yemen. If you look at the trajectory of Ansar Allah, the West call the Houthis, look at the trajectory of their military capabilities since the United States launched its proxy war via Saudi Arabia and the UAE against Yemen, and under Obama in his second term, March 2015. Look at the trajectory of Yemen's military capability in 10 years, okay? It's phenomenal. So if this is where Yemen is today in 2015, where do you think Yemen's going to be in 2030? What do you think their capabilities are going to look like then? You've got a potential Arab nationalist state on the Arabian Peninsula with significant deterrent capabilities and very easily able to reach out and touch Israel, as well as U.S. bases in the Middle East. In much the same way Iran is able to, maybe not to the level of Iran, in terms they don't have the infrastructure that the Iranians have in terms of missiles and a space program and things like that. But I would not bet against the Yemenis because Yemen's military capabilities are fit for purpose. Okay, they're designed for purpose, and they're playing a really unique role in the region. And they put themselves out and made a difference, having been able to effectively sanction Israel, enforcing it with hard power, basically, in a way that no other country is willing to do, and quite frankly, many are not able to do. So this is a kind of an interesting thing. The Elayat port is not operational now. That's because of the Yemenis. If there's going to be a Ben Gurion Canal project, and that this is going to happen by ethnically cleansing and exterminating the native Palestinian population in Gaza in the West Bank, I probably think Yemen's going to have something to say about that, and I probably think they'd be in a position to be able to deter the construction and the development of such projects. Okay, that's something to consider, and I don't know if people in America or Europe are taking that possibility seriously enough. I don't know if they fully get that.
Yeah, and Alex, some people surmise that Israel, has empire ambitions. Of course, they have expansionist ambitions, and some have said that Israel is already attempting, if not already, an empire. But at the same time, this empire seems very outstretched, and I think the Yemen case highlights this. And of course, the fact that while Israel has completely decimated Gaza and just committed a nightmare situation for the Palestinian people, that nightmare situation has had a pretty big effect on Israel's perception around the world. So your assessment of all of this? Oh, sorry, you're muted.
I tend to think that Israel has come to the end of the road. Israel, a segment of Israeli leadership might have such delusions of grandeur that they think that they're going to be establishing an empire and that they're going to be building an Eretz Israel and be taking parts of the territory of, Jordan and Syria and Turkey and Egypt and so forth and Iraq. But the reality is that Israel is and always has been a colonial settler project created by the British Empire in order for the British financial interest to control that region, the Middle East, not only for its energy resources, but because for the last 2,500 years, this has been one of the most important strategic points, because it's a crossroads between north and south and east and west, and so much of the global trade passes through that region that it's absolutely pivotal. And whoever controls that part of the world is in a very powerful position with respect to Asia, Southwest Asia, with respect to North Africa and Eastern Europe. And so Israel has stretched itself so thin, its economy has been devastated. The IDF is pretty much disintegrating. The society is starting to malfunction. It's a dysfunctional society at this point. And to imagine that on this base you're going to build an empire, it's being deindustrialized. It's completely dependent on the United States and Western Europe for financial and military support. The arms, the ammunitions, the military equipment. It's just a delusion, and it's not going to happen. And it was in 2012 that Henry Kissinger, who knew a little something about all these things, said that 10 years from now there will be no more Israel. So that would have said 2022. So he got the timing right, but I think that he got the prognosis correctly.
Yes, and Patrick did have to go, but Alex, if you're willing to stick with me for just a little while longer, because I definitely want to give this some attention.
Absolutely.
Yeah, because when we think about the situation, Alex, I pulled it up earlier, but I need to pull it up again because this just stuck out to me, how Israel's war became unjust. We see as the Yemeni people, we see as Iran continues to support the Palestinian people in its own ways, especially diplomatically, but also including supporting the resistance. This is a long time. Many people may know that the New York Times actually spouts out quote unquote news from opinions. I think that's quite ironic, actually. But what they are arguing here is that Israel's cause was righteous, but now the hunger that Palestinians are facing. So here you see one can have a righteous cause. One's foe can be wicked and brutal and responsible for the conflict's toll, and still there's an obligation to refrain from certain tactics, i.e., using food as a weapon, Alex. But, I'm curious on your reaction to this, because you have here Israel saying they're going to continue operations in Syria. They're going to launch a big offensive against Yemen. They're going to continue the Gaza war until the genocide, until the final solution. But, all of this points to what appears to be a desperate attempt by the collective West itself, led by the U.S., to gloss over all of this and, pepper over a situation that doesn't look too favorable in the long term. Your thoughts?
It looks absolutely awful, and it looks so awful that I think that it's starting to dawn even on the most fanatical supporters of Israel that they will not be able to whitewash this. They're used to doing this. They whitewash history, and they count on being able to do this in the future. But what's going on in Gaza now is so obvious, and it's in front of everyone every day. We see it in pictures and videos. We know the estimation range of casualties, which goes from 60,000 of confirmed dead to more than 400,000, which is pretty much over 20% of the whole population of Gaza. And so they understand that they're on the wrong side of history. to say that Israel's fight is a righteous one, you could only argue that on the assumption that Israel was created as a homeland for the Jews who were, suffering everywhere around the world, who were subjected to the Holocaust and pogroms and expulsions, and who, deserved a homeland of their own. So on that premise, you could say, well, okay, so that might make their fight a righteous one. It's a stretch, but you could make that argument, let's say. But that's not true. That's the narrative that would been sold for generations. But Israel, from its conceptual beginnings, way before 1948, right? So we're talking about the second half of the 19th century. It was envisioned as a colonial settler project by the vested interest of the British Empire. As far as we know, it started with the Balfour Declaration. But what was the Balfour Declaration? It was just a letter of the Foreign Minister of Britain to Lord Arthur Balfour to Lord Walter Rothschild. So from a British politician to a British banker. I don't know how that makes it legitimate, but everybody pretends that makes it legitimate. And Lord Walter Rothschild was the father of Nathan Rothschild, who was the best friends forever with Arthur Balfour. And he was practically hanging out at the Foreign Office on a daily basis. So it was pretty much a conspiracy of the most cynical kind, and they both were part of the Alfred, both meaning Nathan Rothschild and Arthur Balfour, were part of the Alfred Milner's Round Table Group, and the Round Table Group said on record that the British Empire could not remain a maritime empire unless you ceded that region, meaning Palestine, with a, quote, particularly patriotic stock. I don't know if that's an exact quote, but it was very, the gist of it, that it had to be ceded with a very patriotic stock. That those two words are in that statement, which was given to Manchester Guardian at some point, I think in 1916 or something thereabouts. And so this was thought through, and the British imperial interests also understood that the United States support for Israel was absolutely pivotal. It was absolutely essential. So they prepared that, and the Rothschilds even commissioned the writing of the Schofield Bible, and then Hollywood came in later with the film Exodus, and so there was a very, very thorough, extensive preparation of the Western mindset to create Israel as a cultural fact, that narrative that Israel was a homeland for the Jews. As we now know, Jews are safer anywhere else than in Israel. They're the least safe in Israel. And the Jews are the safest actually in Iran, where they have, it's the second largest Jewish community in the Middle East. And they have lived there unmolested for over 2,000 years. So the whole thing has been a lie, as everything about the empire is a lie at some level or at multiple levels. And the same is true for Israel. And I think that ultimately the whole thing collapses under the weight of its own incoherence. And I think that we're watching it happen, only it's happening in such a tragic way that I think that the West will remain standing with their hands bloodied, and that blood will not wash. I don't think that they're going to be able to pretend that there was some potato famine or some kind of a, I don't know, manioc famine, whatever they invent after the fact. This is how empire does its business. I'll throw in this last bit of statistic. Over a period of about 127 years, that between 1756 and I think 1880s at some point, or 1900, there have been 33 major famines in India recorded. Not a single one since India has been independent, since 1947, not a single one. So it's not the agriculture, it's not the climate, it's not the Indians' inability to produce food. It was something to do with the British rule. And before the British came to India in 1756, for the previous 2,000 years, there have been 16 famines recorded. So you see, there was something special about that same system of governance that is now fighting for its hegemony in the Middle East by trying to preserve Israel.
Yeah, and we've seen U.S. contractors firing at Palestinians in Gaza, killing Palestinians in Gaza. We've seen, of course, Israeli forces constantly doing this, and now it's so cynical that this hunger issue that is reaching this climax in Gaza is becoming this almost code for restoring some kind of morality to the West, which has been completely and utterly destroyed, if it ever had existed to begin with, given this situation. And so, Alex, your final thoughts on this? Israel, of course, is the end game for Israel, and the U.S. behind it is Iran, and they're still looking at Iran. They see Ansarallah as an extension of Iran. I didn't have you on during the 12-day, quote unquote, 12-day war, but this appears to be the end game, a bigger war with Iran. And Ansarallah, with all of its heroics and courage, is a force. It seems like an unstoppable force in the way of toppling all the dominoes to get to this. So your thoughts on the overall end game here?
Well, one thing that the 12-day war has shown is that Israel cannot defeat Iran, and that the opposite is true. Iran can defeat Israel. It cannot defeat Iran short of using the nuclear weapons. And I think even if they use nuclear weapons, Iran could carry on long enough to defeat Israel all the same. So there's no future for Israel. I know that there's still many people out there who have this sentimental attachment to the whole idea of Israel, but it has no future. It's a settler colonial project, and as such, it has reached the end of the road. Another thing I wanted to mention with regards to the 12-day war, that it was preceded by the U.S. attack on Iran. And this is exactly one of those episodes in history that gives me pause in judging the Trump administration, because the United States bombing Iran was so colossally idiotic that I couldn't believe that they would even do it. And so I made a prediction on a number of podcasts that I participated with. I said that either the attack won't happen at all, or if it does happen, it's going to be some kind of a choreographed, telegraphed event where, Trump is going to make the United States, it's going to make a big show of bombing Iran, but it's actually going to be like an agreed type of WWF fight, where the fight is not real, it's for show. And the way we're going to know that to be so is because Iran's response is going to be a choreographed, telegraphed event. And this is exactly what happened. And so, I don't know how to predict what happens, because I know that Trump is facing tremendous pressure to go to war against Iran from the Christian Zionists and from the Jewish Zionists and from the Christian evangelicals, which are a very powerful voting bloc in the United States. But I also have a very strong impression that Trump wants to avoid this at all costs. And, we have to remember that the objective of going to war against Iran isn't just to go to war against Iran. The objective is to regime change Iran. Right. And, this never happened. And Trump has been explicit that he doesn't want a regime change in Iran. And his bombastic statements that they have obliterated the Iranian nuclear program, and he's really insisting on that terminology, is the reason for that is because Iran's nuclear program has been the justification and the pretext for attacking Iran in the first place. So if he orchestrated this telegraph bombing raid and then climbed up on the high horse to say, we obliterated the whole thing, what he has done is he has removed the pretext. And now he's put the whole Western empire in a very embarrassing position because, we are all about freedom and democracy and human rights. And so we can't just regime change countries. We have to have a palatable justification. And so if that justification has been obliterated, then, how do you justify going back to war against Iran? So I don't dare predict what's going to happen next. Is Trump going to be forced into going to war against Iran again? Well, that might happen if Benjamin Netanyahu, if his government falls, and then somebody else comes in power, like some Smotrich or Ben Gvir, some fanatical person like that. A lot will happen. The brewing civil war in Syria is complicating things immensely. The efforts to destabilize Egypt and to trigger a civil war in Egypt is going to complicate things additionally. And so I think it's extremely, extremely difficult to try to predict what will happen in the Middle East, what will happen to Israel, to Benjamin Netanyahu's government. Jordanian government might not have a long time to stand. Egypt might, slip into a civil war, but maybe General Sisi will decide that going to war against Israel is a lesser evil than allowing a civil war to start in Egypt. And so we'll see what happens, but it's a very complicated, it's very painful, and unfortunately, I think that the Palestinian people are going to take the brunt of the pain.
Yeah, as they already are, and that's why, that's why we have to highlight it here on this program as much as we can. And as you were saying, we can't predict anything, but one thing we can be certain of is if the United States has difficulty keeping up an air campaign against Yemen, the difficulties with Iran are just that much more significant. And one big killer of a U.S. administration, of a presidency, is to engage in a hot war, especially one that you cannot win, and one that will cripple the entire world economy, which is exactly what will happen if that occurs. So Trump has very good reason to dance around as much as he can the prospect of going to a full war. But Alex, it was a great show today. I want to point everyone to the video description so they can see where they can both support Alex and Patrick, who was here earlier. You can follow both of their Substacks in the video description below, as well as all the places where you can support this channel. I want to thank everyone who gave super chats. Thank you so much. You can go to the video description to see Patreon, Substack, and so many other places. Definitely follow Alex and Patrick's Substack. Anything else you want to say before we head out of here, Alex?
Well, I just want to encourage everybody to speak out, to study, to communicate, to refuse to be intimidated, because us speaking out, us figuring out what's actually going on is probably our best bet to preserve and defend peace in the world. That is, to prevent World War III from breaking out. And I think that we're in fairly good shape because we're the first generation ever to have all this technology, the ability to connect and broadcast these conversations in the real time. And so we can avoid the march to World War III in the way that previous generations were not able to do. But we have to, we have to speak out. That's what we have to do. And I think that could make a huge difference to how history unfolds from here on out.
Yes, and I think we had a great exchange of our perspectives today, everybody. So hit the like button as you go. That will help boost this conversation and boost this message as far and as wide as it can in the algorithm. Without further ado, everyone, take good care. This is the last stream of the month. I'll be back beginning of August. I'll let you know who is coming on with me. Until then, until next time, take care. Thanks again, Alex. We'll head out together.
Thanks you, Danny.
Thanks to all the moderators. Thanks to all the moderators. Thanks to everybody who gave super chats. Thanks to all the viewers. Bye-bye.